Hi, everyone. It's David Ault, and I'm so honored and grateful that you're joining me here for the gathering. If you're watching this in real time, it is the month of February in the year 2023. And February is always the month where people want to try to talk about love. And depending upon where we stand in the spectrum of awareness, self-awareness, consciousness, then love is going to have all different kinds of shades. And a lot of the advice and a lot of the messaging out there is based upon human attraction, that kind of love. A lot of it is based upon self-love and how do I improve that. And all of those things are necessary because at our core, we are wired to connect, and connection is all about love, the recognition of love. And yet love, if we pause for a moment, is indefinable. How do you talk about something that there are just zero words that exist to describe it? It is actually the backbone of life itself. That's love. From a religious perspective, the word grace is a beautiful word to attempt to talk about love. Grace meaning that no matter how much I venture off the path of into the land of forgetfulness, I am always held in this divine grace that only sees me as a perfected being. That's love. That's unconditionality in ways that many of us have have yet to really hold and sustain or conquer, right? Because being human is hard. Being in the density of polarity and duality is hard, because every day we are faced with everything that seems oppositional to love. So of course we're going to talk about it. We're going to make lists and we're going to do all kinds of things to improve it. And there's nothing wrong with that, because every attempt at whatever level leads to the next thing. And as I was thinking about this month and as I was thinking about love, I thought, what would it be like to do a video series on this, but in a whole different way? Reflecting back on the decades long of all the messages about love that I have attempted to give, I'm like, how can I do it differently? How can I find a new way to take the conversation even beyond all the other things that have been said before? So here I am. I'm going to attempt to do that. So I was out walking with this question, kind of excited about doing a video series for the month. And what came to me was the shamanic practice of the medicine wheel. If you're not familiar with that, it's built around the four cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. Each of those cardinal directions holds a question, a self-examination, a sort of willing portal that we walk into, and we allow ourselves to have an internal dialogue or an internal inquiry in a way unprecedented, like anything else we've ever done before. And it says that the shaman incorporates this, does it for themselves, and facilitates other people to do it in order to awaken the hidden wisdom and power that exists within us. I love that, to awaken the hidden wisdom and power that exists within us. So it's not about acquiring a wisdom or a power. It's acknowledging and removing all of the things. So any type of inner inquiry is sort of erasing or lifting these veils off of the truth, and doing it in our own form and fashion wherever we are. If all that I did or all that you did in this particular cycle of incarnating was remove one veil, that's a victory. We're going to celebrate it. So what if we just ran into these questions with full abandon? Because the greatest thing is this mystery, this indefinable energy called love. So let's do February differently, shall we? So the first cardinal direction is south. And the question that awaits us when we step into the medicine wheel in this direction is, how am I still clinging to events from the past? How am I still clinging to events from the past? You could say, what are the events from the past that I'm still clinging to? Now, I want you to see how the question first hits you. Again, depending upon where we are in our journey, we might look at that as a list of historical things, timelines, if you will, of failures and wins in our life. And we're holding on to both of those elements, right? And so if you have followed me or have been around my teaching style of late, you know that my mind and my approach is very much in favor of nuance and polarity, to not look at things as they are, but to become curious as to what is beyond the surface condition. So the same holds true for a question. What's beyond just the surface of this question? How are you and I still clinging to events from the past? So how, meaning to what degree are we clinging? Am I clinging fiercely to a wound? And if I am I clinging so fiercely to the wound because my identity is wrapped up in the wound? So there's a beginning phase of sort of breaking things down a little bit to making it interesting. And if I'm clinging to a wound, say, of abandonment, somebody abandoned me and my God, it just broke my heart. And let's say it felt like the rug was being pulled out from under me. Chances are an identity was built around that event. And that identity is perhaps that the world is unsafe. That's a worldview that I hold, and it shapes my identity. And so my identity is to guard myself at all costs. And if I'm still clinging to that event, then that's how I'm doing life in this present moment. If the abandonment then is fostered an identity around being unlovable, well, see, I'm flawed. I am unlovable. If people really knew who I was at my core, they would be so repulsed that they would just run. So why put myself through that kind of pain again? So let me armor my heart in order to just get through life. And that's a form of an identity that at my core, I'm unlovable, but I'm going to do everything to put on a bunch of masks just to get through this experience, and never allow myself to be that vulnerable again. So you start to see the event that is most predominant, the high potent clinging to an event is the thing that is equal to, in ratio to, the identity. And so those identities then are shaping my present day. And if I've become used to the identity, if I've become used to the idea that I'm unlovable, in a very paradoxical way, in a very nuanced way, in a very polarizing, inexplicable way, that identity is working for me. So how does that pan out? So if I think that I'm unlovable, and maybe I don't even know that consciously, it's just non-conscious, and the non-conscious component of it just permeates everything. And so I'm going around robotically living that out. Then what that does is I get to be right. I get to be right every time I am rejected. I get to be right in the storyline or the narrative that it's safer to play small, or it's safer to not bother. It's safer to not even to try. And oftentimes I see then that the diminishment of my exchange with the world is based upon that identity. Where is the validity of truth in that identity? There is none. It's all based upon thought. It's based upon an adoption of a belief in the moment that the wounding happened or the event happened. A beautiful way to talk about this is the spiritual teacher Carolyn Mace used to call it the 6-second theory. I have used this so many times throughout my life as a teaching tool, and people get it. And it's based upon the idea that something that could have happened in 6 seconds still shapes and still controls the way in which you do life and the way in which you think about yourself to this very day. 6 seconds. Something from adolescence. It could have been an offhanded comment from a parent or a guardian or a teacher. And in that moment, when you heard that, you took it in and you adopted it as real. So the example that I always give is the night that my father passed away when I was 7. And story poor, not enough bedrooms to go around. So I slept on a cot in the corner of my parents' bedroom. And back in the days of rotary phones, that phone was on a sort of little pedestal outside of the doorway of my parents' bedroom. And so my father was in a VA hospital, died in the early hours of the morning. The phone rang 3 or 4 a.m. And I remember hearing the conversation, and the nurse was telling my mom that my dad had passed. And she was taking the information down. She hung up the phone. She dialed and called my aunt right after that, told her what happened. And then she said this: "What am I supposed to do with a 7-year-old boy?" And I heard that. And in that 6-second moment, I and who knows how the adoption of the belief actually organically happened, but I must have internalized that question that she said in such a way that I interpreted it and adopted it and held it, clung to that event as if I then, David Ault, was a burden. I was in the way. This situation was proof that I was taking up valuable space. And accompanied with that, then clinging to that event in my life was a set of behaviors to hold that thought as real. And that was, then I'm going to have to work really hard to not get in the way. I'm going to have to make good on my presence here by trying to help. And so you start to see then this buildup of becoming a people pleaser, of becoming someone who doesn't feel that they belong. And so there's many directions that you could go behaviorally with that. Mine was the overachiever. Mine was then if everybody else has to give 100%, I'm going to give 1,000% just to make sure that I can breathe the same air as everybody else in the space. Again, non-consciously, but it is the moment when we are making these decisions that formulate the way in which we feel about ourselves. And it wasn't until I was an adult, it wasn't until I was on a spiritual path, it wasn't even until I had engaged in something called conscious breath work. Back in the 80s, it was called rebirthing. And I was in a breath work session, and that moment that had been sort of locked cellularly in my body just went bloop. I saw the whole thing play itself out. Completely forgotten about that early morning event, but realized from that breathwork session how I had lived my life out beautifully in harmony with that belief. And so you see, we're all walking around with a series of 6-second moments, many 6-second moments that are accumulation of all these masks that we are wearing. So the question again is, how am I clinging to events from the past? The reason why I would do any of these clingings is I'm still very much attached to the identity that the event birthed. You see, if I'm attached to the identity of not being good enough, it's because I've become so accustomed to showing up in life that way that even though I don't want it, remember the old thing in the beginning I talked about, it's the month of love. Even though there is a part of me that craves just the basic human affection of love, I'm going to continue to attempt those things, and I'm always going to come up short because I haven't addressed the identity. I haven't examined how tightly I am clinging to this label of being damaged. And so that is step number one. What do we do with that? Well, I say, rather than try to turn away from those painful moments, or and again, I got to throw in here, it's even the good moments too, like if you won something, if you got a position in leadership, or if you were the president of your class, or if you were popular, you can begin to see that identity of feeling good about being popular then starts to breed this quest of feeding a hungry ghost, because popularity is fickle. Leadership is fickle. Not everyone's going to like you. We're not always going to be popular. And if that identity is so precious that I'm clinging on to the need to be that, I'm going to have a real challenge as I age. If my identity was on some type of beauty, some external beauty, I'm going to have a real challenge as I begin to age, because human beauty fades. The external beauty fades. And you can begin to see it doesn't have to be something entirely negative. It could have been something incredibly sweet and juicy and wonderful. But if I'm trying to lock these timelines in and to keep them, then I realize that clinging to events is a form of suffering. I have to become malleable. I have to look at the isness of life, and I have to find a way in this topic of love to love it all, even the passage of time, even the negative event and the moving beyond to the positive event. Do you see? So it's the whole full spectrum. Medicine wheel, south. How am I clinging to events? A better way, I think, to really juice this question up is, how am I clinging to identities? My list of identities. How am I clinging to those things? The identities that were birthed from my past. There is no right or wrong way to approach this work or this question. The beauty is, are you willing to approach it? Are you actually willing to write that down and to sit with that this first week of February? We can look at each weekend message as a class. Am I willing to take the class and look at the question to see, what are the identities that I'm really, really clinging tightly to? What are the identities that I've let go of? And to begin to see, what is the wisdom that wants to speak through me through the examination. Did you hear that? It isn't about, here's the answer, because that's not how it works. It's about, what is the wisdom that I can now see? Remember, the shaman does this because he wants to unearth, unveil, uncover the wisdom and the power that is already inside of you. And so this examination is really an act of love. It's such a juicy act of love to go, okay, I'm willing to look at how I do that. I'm willing to see how my ego sometimes is in the driver's seat in such a ferocious way that it might take a lot to get them to, it's not going to go away, but to get them to let something else drive for a while. So sit with this, okay? Again, there's no right answer. This is not a right or wrong thing. It's the willingness that you have to be curious, to be willing to lean into an inner inquiry about yourself. And so my story, the 6-second moment, what are your 6-second moments? I had to look at how much mileage I was getting out of thinking that I was not good enough. And you might go, well, that's absurd. But that's, again, when I talk to you about nuance and polarity, the things that we would never think were serving us are actually serving us. And that's why we continue to cling to them. If clinging to an identity of being unlovable didn't serve me at all, if I didn't get anything out of it, I would have left it a long time ago. Clue. What am I getting? What am I getting out of the identities? There's a question. How has the identity served me? How can I not make these identities wrong, but thank them? How can I hold ceremony for those identities and say, okay, thank you so much. I know that you will always be a part of the totality of my soul. But how can I cling lightly to them instead of hard pressed out of fear or preservation? So much good stuff. I would love to hear what comes up for you. I hope that you respond this week, and I will see you next time with the next question. Thank you for joining me for this series.